How does our culture play into our ideas and our definitions of environmentalism, and so much more. So with that being said, I want to turn the attention to our lovely panel. So before we get started, can I just ask y'all to introduce yourselves? Let's see, name, pronoun, I mean, anything you'd like to include, any organizations you're affiliated with, any information you want us to know. Let's get started.
It works.
Can everyone hear me okay? All right, my name is Nell. I use they, them, or she for pronouns. I am the president of UConn Chain. We are a radical student organization focused on direct action and mutual aid. That's everything.
Hi everyone, so my name is Keisha Sheikh. I use your pronouns. I am the current secretary of USG, but also the co-coordinator for UConn Salon, which is a program underneath the Asian American Cultural Center that is focused on raising awareness of what it means to be Muslim and eradicating Islamophobia at the university.
Hi everyone, my name is Mehdi Namazi. I am currently the campaign coordinator for the Sustainable Skies campaign in UConn Praxis, which is an organization on campus which does a variety of activist and advocacy issues, ranging from environmentalism all the way to sexual assault on campus to affordable education. I'm also an intern with IRIS right now, which is the Integrated Refugees and Immigrant Services. My internship is focused on creating an educational resource for new incoming immigrants that have children in order to understand the Connecticut education system. And on top of that, I am the president of Tri Alpha Honor Society, which is a first generation honor society here on campus.
I'm like Joy Cloud, I work the mic. Anyway, hi everybody, I'm Colleen Batista. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Connecticut at the Expo Education. Do a lot of things here. I work at the Office for Diversity and Inclusion. However, yes, here's why I'm here. It's because I am a youth representative for UNESCO, or a UNESCO youth representative, meaning that I am called upon if there's any event or anything related to youth and dialogues. We do a lot of global level collaborative events. I work with multiple organizations, and they're based in Angola, they're based in Brazil, my home country, they're based in the Dominican Republic, Bolivia, throughout Latin America, you name it. And I'm very honored to be here, because every time I get invited to be with the undergrads, I feel much cooler. Anyway, thank you for having me.
all so much for being here. It's an honor to be able to chat with you all today. Can everyone hear me? Beautiful. Okay, so before we begin, I want to acknowledge that there's some major problems when we discuss environmental matters, and that's the language we choose. So in an effort to prevent gatekeeping in these conversations and make sure everyone is on the same page when we're having these conversations, I just want to take a moment for us to define two key terms together. So the first one is environmental justice. Environmental justice is the idea that all people and communities have the right to equal protection under the law and to the right to live, work, and play in communities that are safe, healthy, free of life-threatening conditions. It's based on the reality that certain groups in society bear unequal environmental and economic burdens like poor air and water quality, as well as unhealthy living conditions resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations, laws, regulations, you name it. So, are there any comments, additions, subtractions from that definition from the panel before we use it as a working definition? Good? Okay. So then the next one, and final one, is intersectional environmentalism. So intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive version of environmentalism that advocates for the protection of both people and the planet. It identifies the ways in which injustices targeting frontline communities in the earth are intertwined, as well as how social inequalities influence our perception of environmentalism. Anna, what do we say about that? Sounds good? Okay, how do we feel about that? Good? Beautiful. Okay, so let's get into some questions. So my first one is, how does your identity play a role in your participation in the environmental justice movement? Feel free to include any aspect of your identity that you see fit. So whoever would like to start, feel free.
I will start. So I think my identities kind of clash with each other. I grew up in the Muslim household, but I am gay. So growing up in that environment, I kind of felt that there was always this kind of pressure to play multiple roles. And so going into the environmental spheres of UConn, I felt that there was similar situations where I had to play multiple roles in participating in just conversations where I would have to adjust my way of discussion. In education, I would have to be more conscious that I'm talking to a group of people that is primarily white. I would constantly have to, one major issue I have is that nobody can spell my name correctly. And that is just the way it is, and I have to suck it up and move on. And at some point, it does kind of become normalized, that you feel like, yeah, I will just, this is how I advocate for myself in my workplace. But it doesn't really have to be like that, but after a while, it's pretty tiring, and you do end up kind of giving up parts of your own identity in order to better fit into those spheres. And a lot of it makes you feel like more successful, because when you advocate for yourself in these primarily white spaces in a way that is more accepted by primarily white people, then it receives better reviews, to say the least. So you feel a lot more involved in your own organization and in other organizations on campus when you're trying to do collaborative work.
You'll have to forgive me for being long-winded. I did take notes on this question. So I am queer and trans and South Asian, and also if you know me, you know that in my student work and my organizing work, I'm also an unabashedly socialist. So in all of those identities, it's kind of impossible not to see how ecocide, or the systematic destruction of our environment and the name of profits, interacts and impacts all of these intersecting oppressions and cultivated identities. Specifically, when it comes to my heritage, I didn't really make this connection until later on, but through educating myself about where my family comes from, so India, and some of the militant struggles that came into play when resisting British colonialism, the original tree huggers, who were a village of Indians who quite literally chained themselves to trees to protest British deforestation of the hedgerow trees in their village. These are trees that fed them, nourished their cows, housed them, and it's felt so powerful to me when I learned about this history in the 18th century of militant eco-socialist struggles, because I can, in embracing this heritage, sort of bring that movement into the work that I do today, and bring those attitudes into the works that I do. Of course, this is a struggle that evolved well into the modern era. So in the 1970s and 80s, when India was falling more prey to neoliberal capitalism, the same movement of tree huggers, led by Indian women mostly and children, came back in order to protest this harmful developmentalistic attitudes of the capitalist class at the time. So my home and the people I would consider my people have always sort of had a contradictory, complicated relationship with the environment, but in sort of choosing my relationship with these identities, you can really see the infinite potential for anti-colonial, anti-ecocidal movement building and resistance in general. As a queer person, I feel as though that sort of the way this relates to environmental justice is the definition of intersectionality. If you have sort of traced back the roots of both queer and transphobia, as well as the climate crisis, you realize that it's all located in the horrific regime of colonialism, which exported not just this extractive relationship with the environment and the complete disregard for its dignity and its beauty, but also Western Christianized norms of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to love and present in a way that is fulfilling, and restrictions on how we use the land and how we interact with one another do stem from those two things. Do these impact my relationship to climate justice? I guess to be frank, not really. That's mostly because whether you come from a position of privilege or not, real climate justice sort of demands an unequivocal and unflinching and uncritical solidarity with all oppressed people, and that can happen irrespective of identity. I think what taught me that was being a radical organizer above all, because to me the class aspect of it is really what unites a lot of us in this community. So, sorry, that was very long-winded, but thank you.
All right, I'll go. In my case, it's a little different, I guess, because, I was born in what they call favela or slum in Brazil. I was born in Rio, and then I was raised 3 hours away from Rio in a traditional community, right? First and foremost, I forgot to say that my pronouns are she, her, hers, ella, Ella. And I am, a black woman, but I'm also of Native descent. But because of the binary through which we all sort of approach and perceive each other, it's just easy for me to say that I'm a black woman, right? Because that's less complex and kind of connects to what you were saying in terms of the boxes we kind of have to fit as we go, right? So that's my identity and how I identify. Now, how is that connected to the work that I do? Well, I grew up in a traditional community, and it was a community that is considered traditional because it's mostly native Brazilian folks who, have been fishing the same way for over 300 years, right? So it's what they call UNESCO Heritage Site, meaning that the United Nations has a branch that acknowledges that community is worth preserving because they have been doing things the same way. Now, one thing that I want to say here, as Marissa was, defining intersectional environmentalism, is that she says that, she uses terminology, frontline communities. And because we're here together, because of my identities, my multiple identities, I just want to say that historically, frontline communities part of those frontline communities, there's no separation because we are the environment and we've understood ourselves as we're part of the environment. Now the problem really comes with, capitalism and exploitation, and those are issues that were brought to us by the North. I don't mean to really simplify the history behind that, but that's kind of how it happened. So essentially, white folk kind of create a problem that we're now trying to fix. But historically speaking, like frontline people are black and brown, right? So I'm writing it. There's no way to escape it for me. Like, my mom and my dad were both community activists, right? And we always did things because we had to do things. It's not because it was cool, right? It's not like the airlines are giving out days to go find a flight. Let's see who has the least carbon emissions, right? It's like the carbon emission Olympics. And we know that the US is really number 2 in carbon emission, right? And to me, it's so complex how it's sort of like intertwined with like marketing and even more capitalist purposes. Because where I come from, like we are the frontline people, and we've always been part of the environment. So there's no way out. So there's really no way to separate it. That's, I guess, what I have to share. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So, that was a lot to take in. Thank you everyone. So I am South Asian as well, but I'm from Gujarat, India, and I'm from the Ganji Muslims. So I feel like that's something that's important to emphasize because a lot of people will assume all of India is the same. And it's really frustrating because there are different ways that we approach the environment, different ways that we, different foods that we eat, different ways we prepare dishes, and different clothes that we wear. And I feel like that's something that gets overlooked, and something that I'm still learning as well. But I'm also Muslim, and I think that intersection is something that gets very overlooked. Being Muslim and being Indian, it puts you in this intersection of being a minority in both areas. It's hard being Indian while also being in the mosque. It's hard being Muslim while also being in an Indian area, an area where there's mostly Indians, because there's less than 15% Muslims in India, and in Gujarat it's less than 5%. So learning a little bit about my background and connecting to the environment, I didn't really realize I was an environmentalist, or didn't realize I had that close connection, because like Pauline is saying, it's something that is just inherently part of my identity. And so for me, I grew up in the South, in North Carolina, in Charlotte, and I don't know if everyone knows, but there's huge gentrification in Charlotte. So I grew up in an area where it was just very well known, where we grew up with pollution, we grew up, sorry, I'm fasting, so a lack of hydration. But we also grew up without many resources, without that community in school, and I didn't really learn about environmentalism in general in high school. I learned about it in college, and when I learned about it in college, it was by white professors, specifically white male professors, who just focused on using those binary terms, global north and global south, rather than focusing on within one region, where is the environmental justice. So for me, it takes a lot back. Furry identity does play a huge role in my participation in EJ, just because I connect a lot with my own roots, and I'm still learning about my own roots, and I think that's something that also needs to be emphasized, that your role with EJ goes back to roots, and it's really emphasizing where is your position in this situation, what is your privilege or your socialized identities, where does that lie in a situation. And sorry for talking a little longer, but one thing that I do think a lot about right now is safety in the outdoors. I wear hijab, so I'm visibly Muslim, and this past semester I've been focusing a lot more on my Muslim identity, helping my Muslim community at UConn. So I've been kind of directing more of my energy on that, which I'll speak a little bit more today. But a lot of people will think of that as a sabbatical from environmentalism, I'm not focusing on EJ, but there is a very, very heavily intersection between being Muslim and being an environmentalist and having a connection with the environment.
Thank you all so much. It's our roots, exploring our roots. When I came into UConn, I was like, well, my Latino identity is over here and my interest in the environment is over here. How do I merge those two? And I didn't find that in organizations that existed. And I got to a place where I said, well, we store sofrito or seasonings in reused containers that we already were using for butter or something else. And we store sewing kits in old cookie tins. And we have all these small cultural things that I'm sure y'all can relate to that are inherently sustainable, but aren't marketed as sustainable. And so we have that cultural disconnect that I think we all are always working on getting back to. So that segues into our next question. And for the sake of time, I encourage you to be slightly more brief. I want to hear everything you have to say, but also I want to fit in as many questions as possible. So our next question. So let's talk about how environmental justice is left out of environmental conservation efforts. Why does this happen? What needs to change for it to be recognized in our efforts? Feel free to talk about this in relation to UConn or any larger context that you have.
I would like to take this opportunity to call out the Office of Sustainability. They have historically failed marginalized communities across the board. I think that calling them out at every stance that we can, every event that we can, holding them accountable for not only having a lack of people of color, but consistently failing to reach out to communities of color and get their input. I believe their entire leadership team currently is all white. So I don't know, not good luck. So I think when the institution that we are in is administratively supporting one major environmental body, and that environmental body is failing marginalized communities in your campus, I think changing them is fundamentally our first move. We can't really completely push our environmental initiatives without the support of marginalized communities, and getting them in a place that they can get the support from admin is really important. I would also like to shout out Cindy Collins right now, because her efforts in USG have been really phenomenal in bringing marginalized people into the sphere and getting environmentalism kind of more included within the student body. She's really filled the gap that the Office of Sustainability has left behind. So I think the history of UConn being a predominantly white university, on top of our failed Office of Sustainability, is really what we need to address moving forward, and that's really all I have to say about it.
So, thank you. That's an amazing place to start off. So, yeah, I left the OS team. I was going to work this semester this year, and then I left it due to the situations that Mindy was describing. And I feel like something that instantly pops out is, why is it left out? It's talking about what are the effects that occur after the initial shock, which I'll explain. So, after you have an incident with your supervisor, after you have an incident with a person who comes from privileged identities, who has that power in that realm, right, in the environmental realm. It affects every part of your experience at university. Because being an environmentalist, the environmental realm is already so small at university, but going and working at an institution and then leaving puts you in kind of a bad spot. It follows you everywhere. It's often sustainability is that go-to place an environmentalist looks for a job. And then when you kind of leave, it follows you where when I went to COP26 in November, I didn't want to go because I was going to have to go to a person that hurt me. And it was hard to prove to the organizers that that hurt is still there. That I didn't want to go across the world with someone that harmed me emotionally, and having to explain that
change at some point will, affect most of us. Unless you're a billionaire, in which case you're going to shoot yourself off into the moon and whatever. But it's, more than anything, it is somewhat of an equalizer in terms of how it will disrupt humanity geographically, economically, etc. And limiting the ability of marginalized people to have their input, do direct action, and participate in the groundbreaking work that needs to be done in order to mitigate the effects of climate change, to raise public consciousness about the root causes of climate change, contributes directly to that violence, in that it allows the conversation to be led by people in power who have created the conditions for this crisis to happen in the first place. To bring it nationally or somewhat internationally, I don't know why this is reminding me of what happened this past year in the Midwest with Line 3. And if you're not familiar, Line 3 was a tar sands crude oil pipeline. I think the last one in the world, correct me if I'm wrong, that runs from Canada throughout the United States and disrupts some of the sacred territories held by Anishinaabe and Ojibwe peoples. And the reason I feel as though it connects is because Enbridge, which is the corporation that was contracted to do this, that was profiting off of this pipeline, directly reached out to white union workers to pit them against the mostly indigenous water protectors who were simply, defending their right to clean water, clean environment, because supposedly the right to jobs is more important than the right to be able to drink, to be able to sustain yourself. And I think that this pitting of groups against one another from on high is really something that's emblematic of how capitalism, racial capitalism specifically, which compounds both the effects of economic exploitation and white supremacy, how it interacts with climate justice and undermines our goals.
Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, it's, I guess, not to repeat myself, but I feel like historically, when it comes to, policy and all these conversations, particularly about environmental justice and the ways we kind of understand it today, that all was birthed in institutions. So historically speaking, when you think about institutions, typically the agenda includes profit and white supremacy. Even if folks some folks in the institution are fighting against it, primarily the institution has its space. Not its space, but like its pace, right? Think about the institution as like a train going really fast and having its own goals and ambitions. Now, when you look at the folks who are directly affected by justice issues right within the work itself, it becomes very complex because justice as an idea, especially justice for black, brown, queer folks, is very anti that particular agenda that institutions are trying to defend at all costs. And people are like, keep pushing, you're a person of color, I can keep pushing, but it's hurtful. And really have to, open space to, really have these conversations and really, as you said, just to practice that, but really keep calling it out. There's no other way, other than accountability, and that's I guess the way to go when it comes to really including environmental justice into historically, traditionally, injustice spaces. Thank you.
Yeah, both have different things too. Yeah.
Okay, so one more thing I want to add is that environmental justice is left out a lot in the conversations because it's very difficult to call them out. There's a spring flip happening by the OS on next Wednesday, and the common understanding of speaking out against the OS at their own event is that not a good question. And if you are an environmental organization, it can seem like you are stepping on your own toes when you are pushing for environmental justice in an environmental conservation kind of area. And so it's hard to navigate the sphere because you don't want to hurt your own cause, because environmentalism it involves everyone. And so when there's people that are doing environmentalism in a way that it hurts you, but it hurts your community, but at the same time is also doing their own thing for the environmentalism movement, it makes it like an eggshell to navigate.
I guess really quickly to discuss, what can be done about this. I think some of the commonalities between many of the radical movements that have, genuinely made waves over the past decade. So that would be the multiple uprisings by Black and brown people to address white supremacy, whether it be Baltimore, Ferguson, or Minneapolis, and then nationwide, whether it be Lyme-free protests or Dakota Access Pipeline protests. All of these historic uprisings have been led by people from colonized backgrounds, whether you're Black or Indigenous, and B, they have been severed from the institutions that we think we depend on day in and day out. That is to say, they are independent of the state, they're independent of nonprofits, they're independent of corporations. Usually, sometimes, if you've ever gone to Pride and seen an advertisement for a bank or a credit card, you know that there's immense potential for things to get co-opted, but severing ourselves from institutions and doing coalition building is, the best way in which to inject intersectionality, injecting class solidarity, and injecting a genuine analysis that is not tainted by, the musings of the ruling class saying, oh, you can vote your way out of this situation, oh, you can work at a high-paying NGO out of this situation, etc. And I guess to finish that point, the name of the game to me is disruption and militancy, whether it be going out and protesting, blocking pipelines or other solutions that I'm probably not allowed to endorse.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Mentions of the OS definitely resonate with me. I kind of lit the fire under the OS's behind about a year ago today. And I think, something that has occurred to me time and time again is, institutions like that are working exactly the way that they were formed. They're working to serve the people who created them, which don't look like us, don't have our backgrounds. And so, walking away from those types of institutions, creating our own organizations, our own conversations like this, which was my motivation for creating this event, I think it's just so crucial to building together and moving forward. So my next question, how and in what ways do y'all envision the EJ community growing at UConn specifically? What steps can all of our lovely friends in the audience take towards this goal? What steps are y'all taking?
Now that's the question that makes me really smile, because I really am trying to believe that one day we'll be able to accomplish anything, partnering with institutions, but the real power, of course, is really here, right? Sitting right across from me, the lady with the long nails, she has the power, that's it, right? I feel like we really need to organize and really, historically speaking, even when you think of human rights as a movement and environmental justice being part of it, folks demanded it. Those were changes that folks demanded. Okay, so that's really the only way to change it, right? If we get together, if we look for other organizations, that kind of think alike and are open to have that dialogue, just really get organized and go up there because we really cannot wait. You know, we should not be, at this point, I feel like we're sick and tired of waiting for institutions. No offense, yes offense. But I feel like, just, you have the power. I'm like, you know, and I'll give you like a little story to wrap this up. I remember, I went to this thing in Brazil called Paulo Freire High School. Paulo Freire is a really big an educator, philosopher. He wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? So I was about 17, that was a million years ago. We got to the school, we had this like group of radical students, radical educators. It was this thing called the teacher training high school. The radical educators, I was one of them, you know, community educators. We were at the door and we were trying to get into the school because we made a shirt that said that educators are like eternal learners or something like that. And I remember the principal of that school, she was super conservative and super, you know, just right-wing, you name it. And she wouldn't let us into the school because she felt that it was very controversial. So we were just like standing outside of the school. There was a square in front of the school. We weren't allowed in, so we're just, you know, doing a quick sit-in. There was an educator who came, and she's like the most radical. She's like, you know, this radical brown queer educator. And I'll always remember her. She was a huge mentor for me. She showed up and she's like, why are you all outside? And we're like, no, we're not allowed to let in because our shirt is controversial. It's just like, all right, you open the book on page 56. We're about to have class right in the streets. She did that to show us that we truly had power. So if she was able to do that with minus zero resources in Brazil back, you know, a million years ago, y'all can do it right now. That's it. Thank you.
I'll give another shout out to Sydney because I feel like she's been very exemplary at the model I'm going to talk about. But what we really need to be a little bit better at is inviting different sectors of the community into environmental justice organizing and being conscientious about how we do it and who those groups are. If our workshops and protests and sit-ins and conferences, if they're not hitting, if they're not engaging people, then it's incumbent on us as activists and organizers and sustainability, advocacy-minded people to really tailor those conversations and those direct action events to the groups that we want to get in on the struggle, to the voices that we want to hear from. So to me, that's pretty intuitive. For example, let's talk about environmental racism and how it relates to colonialism and white supremacy, how it relates to gentrification. Let's talk about STEM or liberal arts and radical frontiers in science and engineering and literature and how that can be used in order to mitigate the climate crisis. Let's talk about what you as a student worker can do in order to elevate this conversation among your coworkers and among people who maybe you don't work with, but you have commonalities because you're still employed at the same university. That's kind of my segue to probably the most important point I'm going to make tonight, and that is labor organizing is one of the most unexplored ways in which the climate justice movement at UConn and abroad can really heighten itself, augment its ability to scare people in power. This university and capitalism as a whole, and this whole world, in fact, is dependent on workers, the working class. Whether you are a undergrad person working at the registrar, or a grad student who's teaching a class, collective action between you and your peers is the most crucial tool that we have in order to disrupt things, stop the gears of an institution that is not currently going in the correct direction, and steer it where we need it to ourselves. So that, I think, is one of the things that we should be thinking about among, exploring intersectionality more, making sure our outreach is strong, and so forth.
Thank you, Nell and Colleen. So I think envisioning the community, I want to believe in hope, for sure. I'm a sophomore now, we'll go into the next couple of questions, but I still have 2 more years here, so I'm really trying to believe that others will join. For me, like I mentioned before, I'm an avid member of the Muslim community here, and like Nell was saying, reaching out to communities you don't think have a connection to the environment is key. Because like I have been in plenty of spaces and plenty of orgs where they don't think to reach out to Muslim orgs, or they don't even think to reach out to Native organizations. That is a really big community that keeps getting missed out on. And for me, I feel like that is the biggest thing. Reach out and also reflect and learn. And don't expect that every person with marginalized identity can explain something to you. That's a big thing for me. People who have capacity and have the energy to do that will show you that they have the capacity and energy to do that. And shout out to Professor Carla Dillon, take class with her. She does an amazing job of connecting colonialism to environmental justice. So that's the biggest thing for me.
I think people of color are going to take over the world. I think that the second that there's enough of us in enough kind of corners of the environmental sphere that every person of color can feel comfortable, it's going to be a very quick change in leadership. It's going to be a very quick change in volunteers. It's going to be a quick change in everything that we really do, because a lot of the issues that we have right now in the environmental spheres is that there's an overwhelming white majority, and there's no admin support for people of color. There's majority white people in even the student orgs that are environmental. And I mean, we're a predominantly white university, so we can anticipate predominantly white people throughout the spheres. But once there's enough of us to go around that every person of color can have a mentor in every organization, and they have someone to have their back, it will be an amazing change.
So one thing that I definitely relate to is the fact of white organizers relying on those of color and marginalized individuals to emphasize that intersectionality and EJ aspects in their organization. If there is an individual that needs a break that comes from marginalized identity and says, no, I need to take a break, I need to focus on something else right now, then you should step up and learn and emphasize that intersectionality and emphasize environmental justice. Don't rely on that one individual or that couple of individuals to do all the work for you.
Yeah, I relate to, of course, everything you're always saying. I think that what you're saying about mentorship is so crucial. I wouldn't be where I am without my mentor, Wawa. I mentored Khadijah since she started at UConn. I think having these legacies of people helping each other and helping, especially when you have a marginalized identity, helping you navigate spheres like the environmental justice sphere here is just so crucial. So for the sake of time, I'm going to ask y'all to keep it even more brief. We have so much to say, so we can talk much more later in other portion of the event. So a common problem in these institutional settings is institutional memory. You're here for 4 years, you graduate, and everyone's like, woo, frankly, we can go back to what we were doing originally. So how can we actively address this? What are the legacies y'all are carrying, want to leave behind? What do you want people in the audience to know? Give us a tea.
Sorry. Okay, so like I said, I'm a sophomore, and everyone around me is a senior or a junior. So please, if you're a sophomore, please reach out to me after this event. But honestly, the biggest thing is reach out to the underclassmen. That's the biggest thing for underclass people. Please reach out to them. Because for me, it was really isolating, and I had to do all the work to reach out to my underclass people and be like, hey, what's going on? I want to be involved. And it would be so much more easier if those individuals reached out to me or reached out to other freshmen and sophomores and told them to get involved. That's really important, and be intentional about that. Please write things down. I think having a Google Drive is really important. I know it can be very time consuming to put that
And like Minnie said, keep calling institutions out and spread that knowledge. For me, like, it was really isolating. Not many people know about my journey with the OS because it was continuously silenced. And it's important to continuously spread that. If you want to learn more about it, please let me know. I've written articles about it, and it was shut down by the Daily Campus, but I'm happy to spread it around. Okay, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, right? You mentioned you reach out to freshmen. My position is a little more of an older person. In my case, like, I'm just gonna keep it very simple, like, just truly be committed. Like, I mean, it says here that, yes, so what's the problem? So the common problem is academic settings, with short institutional memory. What do you do when someone has short memory? You constantly remind them. Me being the older gal here is a reminder to this institution that I am committed to this work. Don't you think that I'm not tired? But I am here because I'm committed. And I'm committed to being in dialogue with younger folks because back to that commitment that I made many years ago, educators to me are learning eternally because we need to be in contact with you all. And there's no environmental justice without dialogue. It's really fun when UNESCO calls me and I get to travel, go to Africa, go to really cool places, but without this here and many other meetings with folks that will give you justice, with younger folks in particular who will give you justice, who are pushing the work, right? Who are giving themselves, not afraid, to like be vulnerable. As an older girl, I'm like, that's the least I can do, right? You really have to show up. Because in showing up, we are reminding the institution that we're not going to stop. We may be tired, we'll take a break, but we're not going to stop. We'll be here. Up until the point you can no longer know what we have to say. And that's it. Just really brief. Thank you.
I think for institutional knowledge, one of the best ways we can solve the changing failures is that we can prepare incoming leadership of our different boards. In praxis, we recently started transitional documents for incoming leadership. So there's about 20 pages for some leadership positions where you can read through everything and have a really strong understanding of how to operate. So you don't have to spend several months doing pickup on your own organization and then being a little bit too far behind to actually make the changes you want to see. And I think that when you have the people that are in your institution that are leaders leave, especially if you are in an organization where your entire leadership team is seniors in the same year, you can oftentimes fail to prepare your incoming leadership team, and sometimes you might not even have a leadership team until after you graduate, and then the few people you have driving along become your leadership, and they're not prepared at all. They don't have the same connections that you have made in the last 4 years of being here, and then they're just headless chickens trying to do advocacy and activist work. But there is hope. For a short institutional memory, what do? You lengthen your memory so that you have documents of everything. You have documents of what you do at your campaign meetings. You have documents of the different pieces of legislation that you brought up. Oh, we actually recently started a Praxis internal environmental research database that we are starting to work on so that future incoming leadership don't have to worry about not having the information that we did for environmentalist work on campus and off campus. So making sure that there's documentation for everything and it's easily accessible and easy to add on to, I think is super important and is the way to fix institutional memory failure.
So, retweet everything that's been said. I wholeheartedly agree. Take videos, take pictures, same time the first time we did our food aid event in Wilmington. We've been doing that consistently every other week for about a year now. And the reason that's worked is because we, towards the beginning, we created this thing called the Food Aid Manifesto, where we basically wrote out our long game to, well, want to achieve. How do we want mutual aid to turn into tenant organizing? How do we want tenant organizing to turn into movements that forward progressive causes in the Atlantic, push back gentrification, enable harm reduction programs for people who experience addiction, so on and so forth. So that kind of documentation is super important, and most importantly, don't be afraid to be annoying. Just don't be afraid to be annoying. Talk about these things with your friends. Make jokes about them. Like when you hang out, it's like I have friends in the audience. You know that I will talk to you about these things. I will bug you about them incessantly, not just because it makes me happy to be a nerd about Karl Marx or environmental justice, but also because it teaches people things, and we get closer when we socialize and just learn how to be in this world together, and become passionate about changing it. So yeah. Piss people off.
Save those receipts, y'all. No, I can't, I don't know how many times I've said I resonate with y'all at this point, but I continue to. Something that I always did was making sure that if there was, during my time at the US, if there was an email that was off-putting, screenshot. If there was some problem, screenshot, record the meeting, do whatever I could. So that way when I released my op-ed, against office and sustainability, I was coming with those facts and I had a well-accepted argument. And so I've carried that mindset over now into, in my role as the EI manager, I'm forwarding emails, I'm sending emails out to people and I'm CCing the DEI email, I'm CCing the chief diversity officer, I'm CCing myself, but any person who could benefit from this knowledge moving forward, and they can look in the inbox a year from now and be like, oh my, you said I was doing this. I think that that's a great way to kind of jog people's memory and say, how can I do something that people have already been working on and not have to restart? Because I think that's a huge problem that we face. Okay, so we're gonna skip some question. We're gonna go to the last question of the night. Okay. In the briefest response you had yet, what advice do you have for these lovely audience members out here interested in getting involved with EJ, activism, continuing their work in it? What do you have to say to our lovely crowd?
Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to be uncertain. Those are usually really scary feelings, especially when you're in the leadership role. Sometimes if you're uncertain, if you are uncomfortable, you feel like your ship will crash. But there's a lot of beauty in those moments of recognizing what it is that you don't know and where you have to grow, and just knowing that there are always, always, always people who will hold your hand and help you through that situation. And there's nothing wrong about asking for help. That's also very important.
Never be afraid to apply for anything. If you see a leadership position in an organization, never think, I'm unqualified, I don't really know everything about this, I don't know the people in this organization. Apply, make space for yourself. If you get the position, it's because you deserve it. And it's because people are advocating for you, and you're pleasing and beautiful and cool. If you are a little bit uncomfortable, you're not the only one. If you feel like you're being attacked in some way, you're not the only one. And as long as you are comfortable making space for yourself, then you will succeed.
It literally rolled to me. It's crazy. Very briefly, understand who you are. Understand your surroundings. Learn that sometimes you have to be strategic to get your message across. Again, we are part of an institute. Anyway. And more than anything, believe in what you bring to the conversation. Okay? Your perspective, there's a lot of value in your perspective. At first, I did not believe that. I second guessed, myself, especially when I entered spaces in this university. Look to the right, a lot of people had gotten degrees from Yale. Look to the left, a lot of people got degrees from Harvard, and I got degrees from, listen, I won't tell you what I got my degree from. However, understand that if you understand who you are, you're gonna get consistent. Once you get consistent, trust yourself, you believe in yourself, you're just gonna be invisible. And you're going to trigger change. And nobody's gonna be able to contain it. And that's it. Thank you.
Something my mentor actually told me last year when I applied for the OS is staying true to yourself. I literally still have these fears going on. Like, it's important, and especially stay true to yourself with your boundaries. Being comfortable, but also understand when it's your time to take a step back and redirect your energy.
Set time boundaries.
Yes.
100%. You will burn out. You will be sad about it. You will spend an entire week watching Netflix on your bed. Time boundaries are essential.
Thank you so much, all of you, for these beautiful words. In my experience, after dealing with the OS for a whole year, my junior year, I took last semester off. I was like, I'm gonna sit back, I'm gonna watch Netflix in my bed, and I'm not gonna do the EJ work that I care about so deeply. And it was a hard choice for me to make because I'm committed to this community and I've been showing up for a long time, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's something I learned the hard way. Yeah, it's something I learned the hard way. But it's what was able to get me to organize this event and bring all of y'all together, which I'm super grateful for again. And on the vein of talking about rest, we're gonna take a quick break. Feel free to move around, grab some food, and then we're gonna have a little guided meditation and a conversation on the power